Entitlement. It's a word many people hate, especially when it relates to others, and others claim entitlement to something. Because what is entitlement? Well, I have the definitions here. The fact of having a right to something, or the amount to which a person has a right, to believe that one is inherently deserving of privileges or special treatment. And it comes down to this. You are not permitted, but you deserve something based on the fact that you either belong to a group or due to your ancestry. Those are the two motives for entitlement. Ancestry is, for example, you're born in a millionaire's family and you're one of the descendants of the millionaire. So when he dies and the inheritance has to be distributed, if he left no will and it has to be equally distributed amongst the descendants, then you are entitled to a share or a part of that inheritance. Entitlement can also be a collective thing. For example, if you are from Japan, your ancestors are from Japan, your ancestors constructed what you can call Japanese society. You are the heir of what your ancestors constructed. And let's say now an American company comes by and wants to turn the place to look like America. Now, the Americans are not entitled to do that. Why? Because it's not the United States of America. You, as a Japanese citizen, are entitled to your cultural heritage. So you have the right to say, I don't want my country to be destroyed with all those American influences. In this case, entitlement has to do with what's logical. Those people live there, they have their existence, they've been there for centuries, they didn't conquer the place, they didn't kill other tribes to inherit the place like happened in North America. So they say, this is Japan, you want to deal with us as a people, you need to value us as a people. You're not going to dump your products here and our own people will starve because they will lose their jobs. No, you need to honor us. We're entitled to good treatment. That's a collective entitlement. So entitlement can be both individually or collectively. Collective entitlement is easy and it's practical because you cannot be part of any human community and not have entitlements. Without entitlements, anyone can do whatever they want to you. A basic entitlement is that you don't want to be violated. In a sense, you don't want to be sexually harassed or you don't want to be victimized by violence in general. That is an entitlement in itself. Every entitlement imposes a duty on others. So if you are entitled to safety, that means that everyone else needs to value your safety and comply with safety. That also means that you need to value your own safety also and comply with safety. But entitlement to safety simply means you have a right to be safe, so everyone needs to comply with you being safe. Without entitlements, no community could function. Now, a lot of people use the word entitlement when it comes to narcissists, thinking that those people think they're entitled to this and that. People tend to get annoyed when a lot is asked of them. But seldom will those same people question whether they ask a lot from others. There's nothing wrong with asking a lot from someone, depending on why you're asking it and what for. Entitlement is only healthy and functional if it's done in the proper context. Entitlement outside of the proper context is abusive. So if someone claims to be entitled to safety, people will not disagree with that because everyone wants to be safe. But if someone claims that they want everything done for them for free without them having to invest anything, now I would say, hold on a minute. Why is it that our well-being is less important than yours? That we need to sacrifice our well-being to make sure you are at ease? Now, in the second case, there is an entitlement outside of context. Now, the believer has entitlements, yes, but those entitlements have one context that can never and should never be ignored: Christ. Christ is the basis and the context of the believer's entitlements. which are all laid out in the New Testament. And the duty for the believer is to walk by faith. That's it. The only thing that's required of the believer is to walk by faith. And all the entitlements are taken care of by God himself. Whether he uses people for it or not doesn't matter. The believer should be active. Yes, that's why he or she walks by faith. But it's God himself that meets the entitlements, which are all there to glorify him. Entitlement outside of Christ always turns abusive, because worldly people, they are narcissistic in the sense that they want entitlements without duties. That's what worldly people want in general. Now, there are worldly people who are decent and they realize that, okay, there needs to be duties for people, because we can't just demand things all the time without there being a practical balance. Apart from those decent few in the world, most people only think of duties when they're forced to, or when they don't have any other choice, or when they are stopped. And from the world's population, there's a minority who are just reprobate. They want entitlements no matter what the costs are, no matter if those entitlements are correct or not, and no matter if those entitlements are self-destructive, meaning that it will harm both them and others in the long run. Narcissists have this sense of, I would call, satanic entitlement, in which they feel entitled to getting validation from others, no matter the context. And that's dangerous. Again, entitlement should have its proper context. There must be a balance. There must be a just balance between duties and entitlements. If there is no balance, that means that one is drained at the expense of the other. This has nothing to do with boundaries and self-respect and all those other worldly concepts. It has to do with reality. If you're dealing with a 2-year-old and an adult, the balance cannot be equal because the 2-year-old is not able to operate on an equal foot with the adult. So in this case, because the adult is much older and has more abilities, there will be more entitlements towards the child concerning safety and the child's well-being than towards the adult. This does not mean that the child should get whatever the child wants, because the child can't even think properly without an adult. So the adult needs to think on behalf of the child often. So there can't be an equal balance here. The balance has to be based on the reality of who's involved and the context in which the social situation occurs. When you're dealing with two adults of a similar background, now you can have an equal balance. So the balance depends on the situation, depends on the context. That's why it's important to have sound judgment. Now in this video I want to point out the following. The world tells you that you're not entitled to anything, that the world owes you nothing. But okay, if the world owes you nothing and you have no entitlements, that means that if someone would jump into your backyard to rob you, you don't have the right to be defended, because you're not entitled to anything. The world doesn't owe you anything. And if the world doesn't owe you anything, that means when you call the police to come, the police is not obliged to come because the world doesn't owe you anything. That means, for example, if a homicide has been committed, someone has died, that means that citizens can also not comply with the solution to look for the perpetrator because, hey, the world owes you nothing. So this whole idea of the world owes you nothing, it's an accusation to condition you to accept narcissistic exploitation. That's what it is. The believer is entitled, but their entitlement is Christ-centered. That's why it's not abusive. In the world, however, you will always have a handful of narcissists that will take advantage of the majority, and the majority gets along with it to be relieved. So there is no justice in the world when it comes to entitlements. There isn't. That's why people in the world don't want to be reminded of justice, because justice implies that there needs to be a balance. And when it's out of balance, it means that everyone is obliged to comply with a solution. And that's what worldly people don't want. They don't want to comply with solutions. They just want to be left alone. So worldly people have entitlement out of context. And that's why they end up being parasitical and abusive. The believer is entitled, and based on this entitlement, the believer is active, because this entitlement has another side, which is the obligation to comply with justice. And complying with justice for the believer simply implies to walk by faith. When the believer walks by faith, he or she complies with justice. So then the entitlement is taken care of by Christ. It's not that the believer activates entitlement. The entitlement is there already. But the believer begins to walk in that entitlement. And that's how life in abundance manifests. Remember, we're under the new covenant. The new covenant has a testament. It's a covenant. So there is loyalty from the covenant maker, which is Christ, to us. We are the recipients of His grace and His mercy. So as receivers, we are entitled to assistance. We are entitled to backup. The only obligation we have is to receive. To receive simply means we have to be humble. So teaching believers that the world owes them nothing is wrong. First of all, it's believers that prevent the world from falling apart. It's believers that prevent much harm from happening. So the world owes believers a lot, actually. But because we don't take offense at worldly people, because we're not supposed to walk in darkness, we allow God Himself to avenge us. So when the world endangers us, that's us believers. When the world persecutes us, it simply means they don't want to admit that Christ is Lord and that Christ anoints whomever He wants. And Christ only anoints those that are born again. If they want to partake in this, they need to be born again also. They don't want that. They have an entitlement outside of context. That's what worldly people have. So they have a narcissism issue that God wants them to give up. They won't. And because they won't give it up, whenever that narcissism issue burdens them, they take it out on believers. Remember what I said. The entitlement of the believer is Christ-centered, so we ought to walk by faith. And because we walk by faith, it's God's duty to rectify evil that's done against us. And He always does. Now, we do decree and declare repercussions, and we take actions to preserve safety. That's on our part. But the actual rectification itself is done by God. And He may use us, or He may not. That's how He decides in every situation. We ought to walk by faith. That's it for now. Keep agreeing with Christ and be at peace.